There we go. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the Table of Nations, which is Genesis 10. Now I know that you all read that 24/7. This is like one of the chapters that's like the genealogy chapters, and Joe begat Pete, and Pete begat Ralph, and on. Nobody reads Genesis 10, but let me tell you, it is one of the most, it is very important. It's very important to know, because it is referred to all over the Bible, including the New Testament. You're continually running into names that most of us just run right over because we don't have a clue who this guy is, that he's a descendant of. Well, when you run across that problem, this is what I do. I open up Genesis 10, find Ralph in there, because he's in there more than likely. Okay, this is a genealogy, kind of a genealogy of the sons of the three sons of Noah: Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And so what we're going to learn, we're going to go through this, and I don't know if we'll get to the second half of my notes today or not, which focuses on Jerusalem and Babylon, because that's what happens in Genesis 11. But maybe we'll save that for next week. We'll just see how it goes. But the Table of Nations should be worn out pages in your Bible, because everywhere there's constant references to these 70. There's 70 names listed in this table. And that's probably by accident, probably not, right? And we see that in the Bible, even Yeshua refers to these 70 nations of the Bible. Yes, certainly there's, plus over history, there's been various numbers of nations, but there's 70 separate bloodlines, if you will, of mankind. And Genesis 10 contains the names of each one of them. So I want to run through this a little bit and make a few comments. I don't want to dwell a lot of time on these guys because it gets a little boring, but we'll run through them nonetheless, just so we have it under our belt. And I want to end with a focus on Nimrod and Jerusalem. This whole Table of Nations actually starts in Genesis 9:25. And remember, Ham, one of the sons of Noah, went in while Noah was drunk and did some ugly things that we've talked about in the past. Won't want to dwell on that. But in the process, his two brothers, which are Japheth and Shem, walk in backwards, cover up their dad, who is naked, and then leave. And then Noah wakes up, and this is what he says. He's not very happy about the events that took place by Ham. And he says in 24, it says, when Noah awoke from his wine. Lots of times wine and alcohol kind of lead to poor things, yes? He knew, although if you do it in moderation, we can enjoy wine, etc. When he awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. So he said, cursed be Canaan. Wait a minute. I thought it was Ham. Why is he cursing Canaan? Yeah, Canaan was Ham's firstborn. What's that all about? A servant of servants he shall be to his brother. He also said, blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So what we find is this actually coming true? And let me explain. It says that Canaan is going to be cursed. Now recall that during our discussion and study in these first 10 books of Genesis, there's two types of cursing. There's two Hebrew words that continually get cursed, but really reflect different concepts. One of which is the curse Satan, the snake, God, in Genesis 3 in the garden after he tricked Adam and Eve to eat from the tree. Satan was cursed. And what else was cursed? The ground. It's the same Hebrew word there, which is Ararat. And that means literally to curse someone in the sense that we know, like you would denigrate somebody with. Where the second word curse, which occurs in after the flood, Genesis 8, it says that God will no longer curse the ground because of man. Because man continually sins, but he's no longer going to curse the ground. The flood was a giant cursing of the ground, of the creation, of the Ararat, which is basically, you can define it as ground, but also the creation, the earth. So God's saying, I'm no longer going to curse. Is that the same as what he did to the ground and Satan in Genesis 3? No. It's a completely different word. The word is kalal, which means I'm no longer going to take it lightly anymore. I'm going to elevate its importance. And I've used this when we talked about that. Remember back in Babylon when Belshazzar saw the hand writing on the wall, and the writing basically said, I have found you you've been weighed in the balance, in the scale. And what did the scale find? You were too light. How many want to be found too light? When God, no, you don't. You want to be found heavy, right? So what God is saying is, I've been treating the creation very lightly. No longer, after the flood, I'm no longer going to curse the ground. I'm going to elevate its importance. And we've talked about this in detail to the point where it actually will have the authority to do what against us? It'll have the right to be a witness. And the witness, the word witness there is like in a court of law. It'll have the right to be a witness against us for our good or our bad behavior against it. Interesting, isn't it? So this word here, cursed be Canaan, is the curse not where he's going to take it lightly. It's the curse where he's going to literally curse them. And then we see Shem. There's some interesting language here. Cursed be Satan, a servant of servants, he shall be to his brothers. This word servant there is, and the phrase servant of servants means the lowliest of servant. Like Joseph in Egypt to Pharaoh, for a while, he was, not to Pharaoh, to the guy that he served, I forget his name, Potiphar. He was a servant, but he wasn't a servant of servants, was he? He was high in the house. He was the head servant. That's not what Canaan. That's not what Canaan is going to be. He's not going to be the head servant. He's going to be the lowliest of low servants. And it's interesting, as we're going to learn, both his brothers, descendants, persecute, I think, the descendants of Canaan to the point where they do become lowly the lowest of low servants. We'll get into that as we proceed. I thought about how the descendants of Shem, remember that's the descendants of Israel. Israel are the descendants of Shem. How did they ever put the Canaanites under the thumb of servitude to any Canaanite? Do you recall any of that ever going on? Because I can remember where the reverse happened. In Egypt, there did the descendants of Ham, and they were put under the service of Ham. But when did Israel ever put in service to themselves the descendants of Canaan? Do you remember any time that ever occurred? Gibeonites, that's right. And when else? There was one other time. Remember the Jebusites? Remember Joshua came into the land, and there was one very important city that he couldn't defeat, but David did 400 years later. Who were they? What city was that? Jerusalem. And who dwelt in that city? Jebusites, that's right. And they were Canaanites. And what happened to the Gibeonites and the Jebusites? They, especially the Jebusites, were put under a servitude in the land of Israel. It's the only time I could think of that. But the Japhethites, who are the Japhethites? Who have they become? Mostly the white Western Europeans for the most part. And what happened over in the ensuing histories of those people? You know, they conquered the areas where these people lived and eventually put them and made them serve them as servants, and many times the lowest of servants. Another interesting part of this, though, is it says that may God enlarge Japheth and let him dwell in the tents of Shem. And this word dwell means, it can mean persuaded. And think of like when Yeshua came and died on the cross. Who were the first people that, in fact, they gravitated towards the message of Torah more so than many Jews, actually. Yes, early church was 100% Jewish, but quickly, who gravitated to that message very quickly? The Japhethites, right? All the Gentiles that were north of the land of Israel. And it says that they shall dwell in the tents of Shem. This is what this passage says. And it's kind of, what does that mean? And it probably has multiple meanings, but what it meant to me was, what is a tent? It's a covering, isn't it? And so when the Gentiles became believers, they dwelt in the covering of Shem. What did Shem do to provide a covering? The Messiah descends from Shem, doesn't he? So, as we go through this, we're going to see that this table of nations, there's 70 names here, but most of the text, most of the verbiage is associated with two groups, the descendants of Canaan and Ham, and the descendants of Shem. So we're dealing with the ones that were cursed and the ones that were blessed. Remember, Shem was blessed. Shem, Ham, and Japheth. You want anything more than that? Okay. Yeah. All three of those went on the ark with Noah and their wives, and they came out of the boat after the flood. And it says that all the descendants of the earth come from those three sons. So the implication is Noah didn't make any more contributions to by having more children. So, quickly, we did find this map online, thank you, Nathan, which was probably just a tad bit better than my hand-drawn map. And we can see Israel right there at the eastern end of the Mediterranean Sea there. And this table of nations, it's focused all around this area. Let me say this about the table of nations. Years ago, most people who studied such things about the migrations of mankind just laughed at the table of nations as being totally fabricated by some scribe in the 7th century BC. In the 600 BC arena. And they said there's very little truth here. What have we found? We found that this is the key to human migration. Okay? If you want to know where your origins are and where you came from, Genesis 10 is your go-to passage. Yeah. Who's got the mic? Thanks, Jim.
Too loud, too soft. My undergrad was in English, and I was sitting in class very surprised when this little secular book showed the Indo-European language tree, starting with Hebrew. And it all goes back to Hebrew, and the branches out from there. I was a bit of a neophyte in the faith, so I didn't really make a big issue of it, but it excited me from then because everything started in Israel, and you saw these arrows going out to the rest of the Eastern Hemisphere, but obviously then from there it all spread to the United States, but through probably China, the Native American culture. What I also find interesting is that as you go east, it's more of like a pictographic, where each letter has a meaning. When you go west, it's more a whole word. And the Hebrews both. So I find that interesting.
What they've learned is all footsteps start in the Mideast, start near the Mesopotamia Valley, and they go east, west, north, and south. We've buttressed that with what your comment suggests, which is language has done the same thing. We see the evolution of various languages, and they evolve from just happenstantly from where the Tower of Babel occurred, where the dividing of the languages occurred. They've discovered that language evolution all comes from that region, which is bizarre. They've discovered, and there's multiple examples of this, but a group of people studied the evolution of wine and how it got developed and its origins, and they can trace back different types of wine back to here, and then this here to here and here to, and where the original wine, it goes back to Turkey. What's in Turkey? Mount Ararat. Why is Mount Ararat important? That's where Noah got drunk. Remember? And it's fascinating. We learned this when Adam and I, we invited a wine, a grape grower that produced wine from his grapes in Israel. I forget his name now. It's right on the tip of my tongue. Can't think of it. Gershon. Remember him? And he's the one that enlightened us about, because he's a wine expert. And he's learned that the migration of wines and the development of various types of wines, if you reverse it, the migration, it all leads back to the Mideast. Yes.
I think it's interesting that anthropologists scientists are related to things in Africa instead of the Middle East. But anybody that the way the migration is, anything that is to the west is very right.
Yeah, that's,
Yeah, they write.
they write
left to
phonically.
right, and the other way they write to right because everything points to Israel.
Right. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Everything, most of the ancient languages that are to the west of the Mideast are written left to right, and they're all phonic driven. So when you draw a T, you're not making any suggestion other than the T sound, right? But when you draw a T anywhere to, well, in Israel and to the east, it's pictographic and phonic in Israel, but only pictographic further east. And this is almost ubiquitous in the ancient languages. Very, very interesting. So in Hebrew, when you draw a T, you're suggesting the T sound somewhere in that word, but you're also suggesting a concept such as what is the tav, which is what that looked like in ancient times. What are you suggesting the part of the meaning of the word is? Sign of the covenant. So that's why Torah is the sign of the covenant, right? Amongst other things. So what we find is that the Japhethites migrated north for the most part. They went in up into Turkey. We'll learn which ones went where. They went up mostly into Turkey and then mostly northwest up into Europe and straight up into Russia, the Caucasus area up there, Ukraine, Romania, all of those, Greece and Spain, all those are descendants of Japheth, right? And Shem mostly stayed put. And I'm not referring to put, but mostly stayed right in the Mideast. There was a few minor exceptions, but they mostly just stayed. They went into southern Iran and southern Turkey, the Mesopotamia Valley, and of course Israel. Didn't go any further south. And the Hamitic tribes, most went into Africa, but we're going to learn that they also went into the Mesopotamia Valley. The Mesopotamia Valley is a mixing pot of all three of these sons make a contribution to the people groups that lived in ancient times in the Babylonian Nineveh area. But we're also going to learn that there was one grandson of Ham who went east, and we'll see that in a bit. So the Japhethites, I'm only going to mention a few names because otherwise I'd bore you stiff and I'd bore myself. But I do want to highlight some of the ones that appear multiple times in other places in the Bible, such as Gomer. Who's Gomer? Where did he go? He's basically Germanic. So the German and the people group in northern Europe are from Gomer. One of his sons is named Ashkenazi. You ever heard that before? What is that? How do we use that? Yeah, one of there's different ways to pronounce Hebrew, and it's Sephardic versus Ashkenazi. Well, that is one of the sons of Gomer. Okay, so the Hebrews, when they migrated up into Europe, they picked up on that name, and they speak Ashkenazi, and it's the words and the letters are pronounced sometimes completely different or substantially different than the Sephardic, which Sephardic is a word referring to the pronunciation of the Hebrew language in the Mideast. And then another guy is Togarma. Everybody heard Togarma? First off, man, you're reaching for a name, aren't you? Togarma? I mean, why not something more simple? But anyway, Togarma. Where does Togarma show up? Along with Gomer in some places. Anybody? No? Yeah, Ezekiel 38. What's Ezekiel 38 all about? Gog and Magog. Remember, Russia comes down. Magog is another guy. They come down with the descendants of Togarma and attack Israel. Togarma, the Armenians, which are live in the area of Georgia, and there's a dispute about where they live. The Armenians actually claim to be the descendants of Togarma, but so do some of the Baltic areas. Baltic is just at the very top up there, Latvia, Lithuania, those guys, that's the Baltic Sea to the west there. And then, of course, Magog, another son of Japheth. Magog went directly north and eventually moved into the steppes of the Black Sea and then on north into what we know today as Russia. And then one that we hear a lot in the Old Testament is Mada, who becomes the Medes. Where did the Medes, remember the Medes allied themselves with somebody. The Medes and the Persians, right? Remember King Cyrus in the 6th century? They allied, and what did they do? Remember we were talking about Belshazzar and the writing on the wall when he sinned, right? And that night, the Medes and the Persians dried up the Euphrates and went under the wall where the river was and conquered Babylon without a fight. What year did that happen in? You want to know? About 600 BC. So the Medes, now where did the Medes go? The Medes basically lived in northern Turkey, northern Iran, and areas into Afghanistan and Turkmenistan. And we hear this word a lot as well, Tarshish, another son of Japheth. Tarshish. Now, who real famous character in the Old Testament tried to escape from God's requests and went to Tarshish? Jonah. And that went really well for him, didn't it? We know the story. It didn't go very well. Where is Tarshish? There's a big argument about where Tarshish is today, but we do know that it is a country or an area that has lots of coastland. And here in the places in the Bible suggest that they're a producer of tin. Well, it just so happens that England they don't produce a whole lot. They don't have a big mining industry, but they do produce tin. So some people go, see, maybe he was trying to escape to England. It wasn't called England in those days. But some people claim that Tarshish is Spain, because it's a country mostly surrounded by seas, right? Some people go as far to say that it would also include, like, the Americas. We think that these ancients were very primitive, could barely administrate themselves out of a bottle, let alone get themselves across the ocean. And what have we found? The exact opposite. These people were sophisticated, and in many of their sciences, language, writing. We used to think that prior to 1000 BC, nobody knew how to write. And what have we learned? That's laughable. Everybody knew how to write. And then the fallback was, well, the only people that knew how to write were the scribes in each culture. Not so. We found letters from just people, regular people like you and I, that are written from ancient times by just average guys. It wasn't just the professional schooled people that knew how to write. And then the sons of Ham. So we see that the sons of Japheth went into Russia. They went into the region between the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea, even into Turkey. They went in all regions west of there, all of those countries, all the way to Spain, England, France, and all the rest. The Norse people are all descendants of Japheth. Now, I'm saying this kind of absolutely, but understand that there has been some mixing along the way from from the other two sides, sons and their descendants, but generally the core bloodline is from Japheth here. Sons of Ham. Now, the text spends a lot of time with the sons of Ham, and we see them much more often in the Bible than the sons of Japheth. They appear again and again everywhere. And so God spends a whole lot more time, especially even with Canaan. But even the son of Cush, which is one of his sons, the grandson of Ham, was the famous guy we know as Nimrod, right? So let's go through a couple of those sons. Put, which we know went into Africa and established in the area in Libya. So it would be just to the west of Egypt. Those are Putites. And who's Mitzrayim? You'll see this again and again. It doesn't get interpreted Mitzrayim, but you need to know this word. Who are the people of this son? Egyptians, right? Very important guy. It's interesting that there's a big debate about who the Philistines are. Some people say that they're Phoenicians, which would make them from Japheth, but I think the preponderance of evidence says that they're actually sons of descendants from Mitzrayim. What we see is the Egyptians migrated to an area in Crete, and then they migrated and established in Gaza. Today it would be called Gaza. And so it's very likely that the Philistines are actually Egyptian through Crete. They migrated back. And of course, Hadrian, remember the Bar Kokhba rebellion in the 2nd century AD? The Jews were under the thumb of the Roman Empire, and Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, had it up to here with the Jews because they kept rebelling. And one of those rebellions was called the Bar Kokhba rebellion around 132 AD. And after about 3 years, I mean, these Jews knocked out one of his legions. They were winning, but only for a while. And then Hadrian got serious, wiped out the rebellion, and leveled Jerusalem, and made a proclamation that no Jew could go back into the land. And he changed the name from Jerusalem to what? Yeah, Aelia Capitolina. And then he changed the name of the land as well to Palestine, which is a corruption of the word Philistine. So that's the origin of the Palestinian name, which the people that are not Jews in the area have picked up on. It's basically come from Hadrian, the emperor of Rome, who corrupted the Philistine name into Palestine. And then we get to Cush, another son of Ham, okay, the guy who did the dirty deed after Noah got drunk. Ham had Cush, and you'll see this if you study such crazy things as where people migrate. It says that the Cushites migrated to the second cataract of the Nile River. Remember Jeremiah? He was a prophet during the invasion of Nebuchadnezzar into Israel, and ended up destroying the country, and they exiled Daniel and the rest up to Babylon. Remember that? Well, Jeremiah was one of the prophets, and he was the only prophet that didn't get exiled to Babylon or killed. Where did he go? Yeah, it says the second cataract. Now, what's a cataract? I mean, we all know those cataracts that grow on our eyes, and we all hate those things, right? But in Greek, the Greek word that we derive cataract from means waterfall. So all a cataract is an area where a river is flowing and there's a quick drop in elevation. So it's either an area of rapids or waterfalls. So there's, I think, 6 cataracts along the Nile River. And the second one is where the sons of Cush went to. So that would make them what? Today. Who dwells in that? What country is south? Oh, I'm not going to be able to look on the map and figure it out. What country is south of Egypt? Sudan. Right. And also named after my son, Chad. Right? The Chadnese, all of those guys are the sons of Cush. I'm sorry. Yeah. But there's another guy that is the descendant of Cush. And this is really important. Who is that guy? Nimrod. Exactly. Now, Nimrod, it says that he was a Gabor Said Panim Yahweh, which means a great hunter in front of God. But we learned last week, remember, Panim? What does that mean? Face. Well, the verbiage here is, I mean, you could take it either way. He's in the face of God in a humble fashion, or he's in the face of God with a fist in God's face. Well, it's the latter, actually. He was a great hunter in the face of God. In other words, and what did he hunt? Animals? No. Who was he after? People. He was a hunter of mankind. And the rabbis go on and on at length about how Nimrod was the creator of and the initiator of all kinds of evils that eventually stood up against God and stood up against Israel. In fact, if you take a look at the history of Israel, with the exception of Egypt, all of these attackers, whether it's the Assyrians, the Medo-Persians, the Babylonians, all these guys, well, where did they come from? They all had either their capital or their secondary capital, Babylon. And they came and attacked Israel. And I'm not saying Israel and God's people have always been very godly, but realize that there's two forces. And God's force, righteousness and holiness, emanates because he chose those people, and he chose that land to be the promised land, and he chose to dwell there. Have you ever wondered why the beast decides to rule and reign from Jerusalem? Why not Babylon? That's his place. Why doesn't he rule and reign from there, or Moscow, or St. Louis? Why does he pick? Because he's claiming to be God, and everybody knows that God has chosen to dwell in Jerusalem.
Is there any hint in the scriptures that Nimrod may have been a Nephilim?
No, not that I'm aware of. There is some sordid tales, myths, stories that have been recorded throughout the ages that he helped bring back the practice that occurred pre-flood, when it said that there were giants in the land in those days. And then the flood happened, and it says also afterwards. There's some suggestion in extra-biblical locations that he assisted that. I don't know. But it doesn't. He's a descendant of Ham through Cush. One of the reasons why we know that Nimrod wasn't a humble in the face of God, but a fist in the face of God, is the word Nimrod actually means rebel. So he's probably not rebelling against unholiness, probably rebelling against what do people rebel against when it comes to God. Yeah, his ways. People, they can give or take whether there's a God or not, but they certainly don't like being told what to do they? We don't have that problem. And Nimrod is a very interesting, not a lot of text is focused on Nimrod. His alter ego name in the Bible, anybody know? Amraphel. He plays, whenever you see Amraphel, just put in parentheses Nimrod, another rabbinic sourced item. He was one of the 5 kings that allied and attacked Sodom and Gomorrah and hauled Lot off back to the Mesopotamia Valley, back to Babylon. But who intervened? Abraham. Remember, he grabbed all of his family and his servants that were with him, and a small little group was able to attack the armies of 5 kings from the Mesopotamia Valley. Pretty awesome, huh? And he saved Lot. And then remember what happened. He gave a tenth to Melchizedek, who was living in Jerusalem. Interesting. Who Melchizedek is very likely who? Shem. Well, you're going, that's hundreds of years after the flood. Correct. How long did Shem live? These guys were living many years. I don't remember how many hundreds of years. Does anybody know after the flood? 600 years total? Yeah, so this is well within, this is within a couple hundred years, this story of the flood. So we see, you'll notice that it's very typical for people to get name changes. Like Sarai got changed to Sarah, Abram got changed to Abraham, Nimrod got changed to Amraphel. It's very common to see this practice. Another son of Ham is Canaan, the firstborn of Ham. And the rabbis say that, if you start reading this carefully, you can almost pick up where God has designated a land area for each of these 70 tribes that disperse out of the Tower of Babel. And the rabbis claim that the descendants of Canaan were supposed to go further south into Africa. But where did they end up? Remember, these are the cursed guys. These are, remember, Ham does the sin against his father Noah, but Ham doesn't get the curse. His son Canaan gets the curse. Where do the Canaanites go? Yeah, the promised land. Is it, okay, now, we're cursed. We're not like the curse of, okay, I'm going to take you lightly. No, this is a curse. Where do they go? These are the cursed ones. They go to the promised land. So when Joshua arrives, who's there? Is it accidental that the cursed ones, why not? There's 69 other names, descendants, that could have been there. So what are the odds that the Canaanites, one of 70, end up in the promised land? And they're very friendly and have a big giant banner saying, right at the river Jordan, welcome, everybody come on in, like in southern, like on the border of California and Mexico. No. I didn't mean to wax political. See? They were not welcoming, were they? They battled against Joshua and the 12 tribes as they invaded the land. But it's the Canaanites who were cursed, and they were the ones that were found in the promised land. And of course we know that God was not acting as a mean ogre to the Canaanites, was he? He was mad at them. Why? He was angry with them. Why? Yeah, they were involved in the equivalent of abortion, killing off their kids. It was much more, not for the kid, but it was very gruesome, the way they slaughtered their children to Baal. And God gave them, it says, the biblical text says, the time of judgment has not come for the Canaanites yet. He gave them 400 years to clean up their act. And the thing that the liberals always do is they always go, look at what this mean God did. He had those nasty Israelites, Jews, go in and slaughter them. But then, when the coin's flipped, and Hitler goes and kills all these people, they get mad at God for not intervening. God can't win. When he does intervene, atheists are mad at God, as though he existed from their perspective. And when he doesn't intervene, they're mad at God. In the case of Hitler. The point is the Third Reich going to get judged? They're all dead. But someday they're going to stand before God and they're going to get judged, aren't they? And throughout time, all people that did not get in the face of God in a humble manner will be judged. In fact, everybody will come before the face of God, won't they? And God will either knight them as his, or he'll judge them and say, you've had your chance. I've given you, in the case of the Canaanites, I gave you 400 years, and after that time, all you did was get worse. You didn't listen to me. We don't have records. The Bible is focused on a very small, little, teeny, tiny group of people that have lived throughout the centuries. But that doesn't mean that God has not been working with the American tribes and the Canaanites and the Chinese and the Africans. And some people turned an ear to God. A lot of the American Indians were believers in a one creator God. Some weren't, granted. But we can find that characteristic all over the globe. When missionaries in the 18th century went into all the world and started preaching the gospel, like it's mandated to in the Gospels, we're supposed to go out and preach the gospel, preach the good news. Many times they would arrive, and these guys already were believing in a creator God. And all they had to do, in fact, there's a tribe in, what's the name of the country? The east, west of Thailand. Burma, thank you. And they're the Quran, what are they called? Karen people. They had missionaries come in the 18th century, and they knew the God. They just knew that this white, they had an ancient prophecy that a white person someday would come to them and restore the true nature of their God, their creator, and tell them his name. That happened. And we find that all over the globe, that there was like prophecies about people and that were they knew that someday a white man would come. A white person would come. A lot of missionaries are ladies as well. A white person would come and fill in all the blanks, restore the truth that had been lost through the generations. So the Canaanites were in the Promised Land when Joshua invaded, and to some degree they got removed. They didn't obey God totally. So a lot of Canaanites survived in the Promised Land. Canaan, he had a son. One of his sons was Sidon. And all these names are real important because you see them a lot. Sidon, who was he? Other than the son of Canaan, who was the son of Ham, who was the son of Noah, right? I keep repeating this so you get it into your brain. So this guy, his name was Sidon. Okay, and who was he? There was, remember, okay, we're talking about the sons of Canaan. So there was the capital of the Canaanites, and it was named Sidon. And it's still there today. A lot of these names you'll find today on the map. And now you'll be able to go, wait a minute, isn't that in the table of nations? Or a derivative of that name? You'll find them everywhere. These names have been memorialized. Sidon was the son of the cursed son of Ham, Canaan, and they named the capital of the Canaanites, which reached all the way into northern Libya along the coast just north of Israel. That's where Sidon was. Tyre was another famous city of the Canaanites, and we know Tyre was that island city off the coast of Lebanon, who Alexander the Great built a bridge and conquered. And then there was another son. His name is Sini, and people believe that, what's one of the terms used for the Eastern peoples, the Japanese, the Chinese, Asian, Sino, remember Sino? Well, they believe that Sino is a derivative of this son's name, Sini. And so the Japanese, the Chinese, a lot of those Eastern peoples came from They're descendants of Ham. So if that's true, what can we conclude about where the Hamitic tribes went? Basically, south into Africa. All of Africa is habited today by the descendants of Ham. Also, we see that they made a contribution to the Mesopotamia, Babylonian area via Nimrod. Nimrod went there. This son, Sini, we see possibly, not for sure, but it's very likely that the eastern areas, China, etc., were also populated by the descendants of Ham. And then, of course, if that's true, who are the Americas? What were the Americas originally filled with? Same people. Yeah, we're all the white guys in here are Japhethites, but originally those tribes came across the land bridge between Russia and Africa and down into the Americas. That's how they speculate that most of those tribes are have their root stock from Chinese people. So it's kind of interesting. You'll see there's kind of three tiers here, isn't there? There's the sons of Ham, and they control most of the land mass. They control all of Africa, most of the Asian land mass, and all the Americas, north and south. What's left? Europe and the Mideast, and even the Mideast they make contributions via Nimrod. So who's got Europe? Japheth and Shem is restricted to just a very little area in the Mideast, where all 3 or 4 continents merge together. It's not very fair, is it? The Shemites, and you'll see this word Semitic a lot. People will talk about the Semitic peoples. They're referring to Shem, okay, the descendants of Shem. And we see his sons, Elam is who? Who's Elam? Persians migrated to the southern areas of Turkey and Iran and the Mesopotamia Valley. And Asher, interesting fellow. He was the father of the Assyrians. The Assyrians were really nice. No, they weren't nice. They were very, in fact, they were accused of being the first terrorists. Many cities, as the Assyrian armies would approach, would give up. They wouldn't even fight them because they knew if they put up a fight, you didn't want to die the way they would kill you if they captured you. So they'd just quit. Lud, the Lydians, is southern Turkey. And then we get to Aphaxad. And Aphaxad begat Salem, not Salem, Salah. Salah begat Eber. Now, Eber is where we get the word Hebrew. And Eber begat Peleg. And in the days of Peleg, it says what? The earth was divided. And so a lot of people go, oh, okay, that's when the continents. Because it used to be Pangea. Okay, one giant continent. This is the evolutionary thinking. So this is the Christian believing community trying to marry with the evolutionary concept. So the evolutionists believe that there was one giant landmass in the middle of this giant ocean, and it was called Pangea. And then there was earthquakes and dividing, the fault lines, and slowly but surely all these land masses, this Pangea continent, divided up, and they started moving. It's kind of hilarious, but to see how, you go, okay, the North America moved away from Europe. Well, if there's land between, how can it move away? It's just under the water, right? But nonetheless, they believed in this Pangea concept where it was all divided and all these land masses moved and ran into each other, caused the Himalayas to rise up by crashing into the Asian continent. And I don't think this is a reference to continental drift at all. I think this is a reference to what? It's a reference to Babel. It's when, what's the focus? People. It's when the Tower of Babel occurred and God divided the people up via their language. So Eber had Peleg, and Peleg had Ru, and Ru had Serug, and Serug had Nahor. There's 10 of them between Noah and the final guy. Nahor had Terah, and Terah had Abraham. And the rest of the book of Genesis is focused on Abraham and his descendants. And we see the descendants of Abraham interacting with primarily two people groups. And I don't think this is accidental. They're either descending with Hamites or they're interacting with Canaanites for the next several books. They're not dealing with the other 70 sons and their descendants. They're dealing with these two groups of people that God spends a lot of time describing. And this cursed group, the Canaanites, it's interesting, they basically establish their home city, which is Babylon, of course. And in the end, God establishes his home. It was there all along, I believe, right from the Garden of Eden. We won't get into that, but you've probably heard my dissertation about where the Garden of Eden was. It was not between the two rivers in Mesopotamia, was it? It was where God chose to dwell. And God always chose to dwell and has always chosen to dwell in Jerusalem. And the river flowed out of there to the east. And the Garden of Eden was immediately to the east of Jerusalem. That's my thinking. It certainly wasn't in Iraq. Yes. Yeah. But I don't think there's any connection there. Yes, it's the same name. Although that's interesting, and I wonder if there is a connection. I never thought of that. So we see this, what gets started to develop more and more as you read Genesis and the rest of Torah is two opposing kingdoms. One, the descendants of Shem. And what did God say about Shem? That he would bless them. And another group that are Hamitic, but as well, more specifically, they're from Cush in the case of Nimrod, and they're from Ham's son Canaan. The rest of the Hamitic tribes all over the globe are not cursed. Ham didn't get cursed. Only Canaan, the Canaanites. And so we see this two diverging forces develop in the biblical text. One is centered around Jerusalem, the place God chose to dwell, and the other is centered around Babylon. Next week we'll get into how this evolution takes place. We'll talk about Genesis 11 where it introduces Nimrod and the Tower of Babel. But I want to end with this concept. Is currently and has been through the generations two spiritual and many times physical forces with a spirit backing up each one that have been totally involved in the affairs of mankind. And they focus on righteousness and holiness in the case of God and his kingdom centered in Jerusalem. I'm not saying that the dwellers around Jerusalem have always been so, because they got invaded and many times killed and hauled away because they weren't. And the opposing group was many times these guys that were cursed. And their home, as we'll learn next week more fully, is Babylon. And we'll see how Babel and Jerusalem, the meanings of those words, give us insight into their spiritual background, which is excellent. Jerusalem is the place of peace, where everything else that opposes God is a place of confusion. So the question and we'll develop this more next week, the question that we need to be asking ourselves is, what city are we living in? Would we characterize our lives more as confusing? Or would we characterize our lives more as saying, I'm standing on a rock. I bring confusion by my errors sometimes, but I can always go home to Jerusalem and find that peace. Or is there ultimately no peace? Is there no home where we can go home to peace? Are we always confused? Are we always asking the question, who am I? Because that's what Satan tends to rob you of, rob us of, is our identity. What is our identity? We've been made to look like him. Remember, we're made in the creation of Elohim. But Satan doesn't want us to focus on that, because then we will go, whoa, I must be worth something. He wants us to focus on the fact, from his perspective, that we have nothing to do with God. And he wants us caught up in the spirit of confusion. We'll get more into that next week. But his focus, because as soon as we know our identity, we can get about something. We know what the goals of our life should be. As soon as we have an identity, if you're like, okay, I'm going to be involved in, I want to be an attorney, or I want to be a contractor, or I want to be this or that. We have an identity. We know how to get there. Or if we don't, we can figure out how to get there, right? But if we don't have an identity, we're just walking around in circles. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to go. I don't know why I'm here. Maybe I'll just shoot myself. That's what Satan's going, oh man, I got him now. Because his whole kingdom is confusion. That's what Babel means. Now, I'm not saying that if you're confused about something that you're living in the Babylon. I'm saying that if you're confused about something and it starts stealing your identity, you don't know where to go, why to go, when to go, or who to go. Now you've got a problem. But if you've got confusion and you go, okay, I need to go home. What's my rock? Well, Jerusalem is one giant rock, okay? If you're standing on that rock, guess what happens? God goes, okay, keep listening, keep walking down this road, all the confusion will dissipate. You just have to have the tools to get rid of confusion, because God's not about confusion, is he? He's about relationship that produces good works, isn't he? Amen? Let's all rise, please. The Aaronic blessing. The Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord lift his panim, face upon you, and give you peace. Amen. God, I was listening to that last week when Adam said it, and I go, wow. In the prayer that God gave Moses to say to the people reveals the heart. Because we've been talking about having FaceTime. Remember last week? Talked about, it's going to take a lot of FaceTime. I ended it with, it's going to take a lot of FaceTime during this life. So when we arrive in front of God, for him to say, my good and faithful servant. And FaceTime means rapport, so we can hear him, and so he can direct our paths. Because we're not going to direct our paths accidentally, per his will, are we? So it's interesting that in this very prayer, he's saying, this is the blessing that I want to give you. I want to give you FaceTime. But in order to have FaceTime, what do you have to have? It takes two faces, right? His face is really anxious for your face to show up, right? And build this rapport. So, anyway, Shabbat Shalom.